Welcome back out to the Shield Armory. We are so thankful that you have chosen to join us here today. I am Chaplain Hughes, and I am here with Chaplain Potter, and we are short one chaplain today. So just the two of us, man.
Yes, indeed. Chaplain Stevenson has had his hands full the last couple of weeks.
That is for sure.
And he's actually helping out, doing a little bit of teaching today. So we are giving him some time to focus on that. And because of that, we actually have had a neat opportunity to bring in a guest with us today.
Yep. I'm excited about that, man. He and I just had a conversation the other day and are catching up and learning about how he's been doing. And so I'm excited he's here today. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give him a chance to introduce himself, tell us who he is, tell us who he works for, tell us what he does. And then we've got some cool stuff we're going to talk about with him today. So jump right in, man.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Greg Veal. I'm an officer here in the city of Roanoke. I've been here with this agency for going on 3 years now. Prior to that, I was with another agency in Georgia. I was there for a little over 6 years and got the opportunity to work in a lot of different capacities while with that agency, full-time SWAT team. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years, and in that interim in-between time, I was managing a personal training company. I say all that not to toot my own horn, but just kind of it will give a little bit of relevance, I think, later to the conversation. So that is who I am. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. And I'm not going to lie, when I look at you, I see all of those things. You definitely have been on a full-time SWAT team. You definitely managed, all these things and the personal training and all that kind of stuff. You can look at you and tell, man, you are in good shape.
Well, that's very kind of you to say.
So, no, I'm serious. It's awesome. I would not want to be caught in a back alley with you somewhere on a bad day. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, I am not exactly the poster child of how to take care of yourself physically at this point in my life. So I'm glad there's somebody else on here who can address the physical portions of things, probably with a little more authority than what I would bring to the table right now.
To be fair, before I hit the record button, you were actually talking about mixing cookies and ice cream and eating like a gallon like every 2 days or something like that. I mean,
yeah, that was several years ago. So I put that behind me about 25 years ago. I left that life behind, thankfully. Otherwise, I may not be here today. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, that's a lot of dairy.
It was a lot of dairy.
That can hurt you.
I'm almost lactose intolerant at this point in my life because I think I had 2 lifetimes worth of dairy in about a 4-year span.
You know what's interesting? When I was a kid, I actually was lactose intolerant until I was about 9. And I had the version like you can grow out of it. And so now like I can eat dairy and all that stuff. But you know what's really strange? I still can't drink plain milk. Really? It still bothers me, like to this day. Like I can eat a bowl of cereal and I don't drink the milk down behind it. But if I just get a glass of like milk, like if I'm going to sit down and eat cookies and get a glass of milk and drink it, it still kills me like I'm lactose intolerant, but nothing else bothers me. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand it. Yeah, it's really weird. But anyway, I digress. So let's jump into what we come to talk about today. How about that? So, sure. Darren, we, as chaplains, one of the things that we talk about with people is the triangle of wellness, something we share about because what that does is that triangle gives us kind of a picture of what it looks like to be fully well and to have a whole picture of wellness. Do you want to talk about what that looks like?
Absolutely. I mean, we have talked quite a bit about the emotional or mental aspect of wellness on the one side of that triangle, as we've hit on resiliency and coping and how to offload the stress that as officers or just in general in life. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the mental aspect of the toll of the job? I'd say in just about everything that we focus on with these episodes, we kind of weave in the spiritual aspects of things. It's part of who we are as chaplains here at SHIELD. But we also recognize that if we are going to be whole, if we are going to have this holistic approach to things, and if we think about the word shalom as being whole and well, and not just an aspect of peace, but to be all the way around whole and well, the physical aspect of that is very important. And so we can't just take care of ourselves in one or the other or two of the three. We have to have all three, or something is going to give. And when something, when we have a blowout, if you will, in one of those areas, it's not good. And so today we want to focus on the physical a little bit, because we have touched on it a little bit here and there as we've talked about coping. But today we want to zero in a little bit more on the physical aspect of wellness.
Yeah, and so that's where you come in, man. And, we want to talk about, so let's kind of do this. We obviously can't hit all of the areas in one episode,
Sure.
Just not reality.
Yeah.
But as someone who has a long history as an officer, can you just kind of share maybe kind of a broad list of some of the physical things that officers deal with, in their daily life, their daily job, and kind of some of what maybe some of those struggles are and some things that are trying to take care of, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it. As humans, our physiological systems that we have, we come into this world with the same design fundamentally. We've all got the same system, as it were. And so when you think about that, excuse me, in terms of the broad spectrum of people in the world, or the way that those same physical systems manifest from one person to the next, you see some incredible differences. You're talking about the difference between a professional athlete and someone at the complete opposite end of that spectrum. It's the same physiological design of these people. So I've been fascinated by that my whole life. So focusing a little bit on law enforcement when it comes to the maintenance of these physiological systems, in my going on 10 years now as a police officer in various different aspects of the profession, I've noticed there seems to be a disparate effect to a certain area of the physiology of police officers, and that is really the kind of hips and the lower back. All right, so the articulation of the hips to the lower spine, and I know that this is just audio. I wish we had some visual where I could kind of show. It might help lend a little bit more relevance, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that the principles that apply to any human in maintaining these physiological systems of movement are the same that apply to police officers. We just have to understand, as police officers, what are the specific parts of our duties, specifically patrol, that are going to have an amplified effect on these lower back systems. Now, anybody who's been around police officers or has been a police officer for any amount of time, the officers I'm talking about. The guy with the bad back, he threw his back out years ago, and it's something that plagues him throughout his career. He's missing days. He's having issues with lower back, hips, knees, neck, things like that. So that's kind of what we want to focus on today. But yeah, that's sort of where I think I want to focus for where we take this.
So in thinking about this, I know, like, from us, where we are not officers, but where we spend time with officers and ride with officers on patrol, just some of the things I'm thinking about, and I guess before we kind of dive into those effects and what things we can do to help and that kind of thing. But, I think about some of the things that may cause some of those issues. I think about the size and the weight of the gun belt, that officers are having to strap on every day. There's a lot of equipment on that thing, and it has a lot of weight. Absolutely. And so you strap something like that on, but then you're inside in and out of a patrol car all day long.
Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about, Chap, I mean, that is exactly what I was referencing. These are the things specific to patrol duties that we have to think about, right? So understanding first and foremost the hips and the lower spine, what they are designed to do, what they do for us as people when they are operating in a healthy way. If you think about throwing a ball, if you think about punching, these are all movements where we're taking kinetic energy from the ground, where we're standing on the ground, right? And we're delivering that energy through our hip chassis, up through our upper body. And then that's how we, like I said, visually it might make a little more sense, but hopefully that makes sense to the listeners. But what you mentioned, wearing that gun belt, okay? You have a device that is strapped around your waist that has all the weight of all the equipment oriented toward the front. So what that does is it creates a position that any personal trainer will recognize as what we call anterior pelvic tilt. So just the tilting of the pelvis forward, essentially. Now, that position in and of itself is not a problem. We as humans have to be able to access a myriad of different positions in some of the most exaggerated ranges of motion. The problem is when we create a permanence of position. So if you think about that gun belt creating that forward tilt to the pelvis, and you combine that with the fact that we now have an officer who is, for a large portion of a 12-hour shift, also in a seated position, where we are now bringing the knees up, we're shortening the muscles of that front hip, okay? So forward tilt to the pelvis and remaining in a seated position for long periods of time, we create a shortening of the front hip, and we sort of lock into place that pelvis tilted forward. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally. I get that. I can see that. And I'm not even an officer, just from watching. You know?
So that's the positional problem that if we're, like you said initially, Chap, there's so much we can go into. But I think focusing on just that, have some awareness of the position that we're creating and how we can oppose that, how we can manage that moving forward as officers. And it's really, really simple. You know, there's a lot of big words when it, go ahead, Chap.
Well, I was just going to ask you, so what are some of this? I mean, this may be obvious to several people who are listening, because they're probably, if officers are listening in, there's a good chance that a majority of those that are listening are dealing with some of these issues. But what are some of the impacts or the side effects of being in that position with that gun belt on for hours each shift? That's in that seated position. What are some of the negative impacts of that?
That's a great question, and we should really touch on that, you know, make it real. And so the problem with that position, once again, in and of itself, it's not a problem, but when we create an environment where we become stuck in that position, which, once again, broken record, is a short front hip with the pelvis tilted forward, we have to think about what that position does to the rest of the spine moving up and to the lower part of our body moving down. So with that pelvis tilted forward, if you can imagine, this is a position that we call lumbar lordosis, where you kind of got your butt sticking way out and your belly sticking way out. So when our pelvis is tilted forward, that's the position that we create. So we're essentially elongating the muscles of the abdomen, right, and the core, while at the same time shortening the muscles of the lower back and lower spine. So when we get stuck in that position, anytime in a physiological position you have an elongation of the muscle tissue, it is inherently weaker, right? Anytime you have a contraction of it, you know, you would think the opposite, that it's inherently stronger, but in reality, it just means that it is activated, right? Okay, so when we create that permanent position, we now have a weakening of the core, right? And we have a shortening of the muscles of the lower back. So if we follow that upstream, because that belly is kind of like in a distended position, the thoracic spine, or the spine of the mid-back, has to account for all of that weight being pushed forward, okay? So you now have a curvature in the opposite direction. So you create this exaggerated curvature of the thoracic spine, which creates uneven disc pressure, which is going to cause nerve issues, which is going to cause impingements, which is going to cause the discs between those vertebrae to herniate and have problems. If you keep going upstream, because we've now dumped weight in the opposite direction in an exaggerated way in the thoracic spine, you go up to the cervical spine, it has to also account for that. So what does that mean? It means the head gets thrown forward, right, to account for that sort of a counterbalance, and we now put the cervical spine in an unhealthy position. We also cause the shoulders to roll forward, what we call chronic internal rotation, which causes impinging of the nerves of the shoulders. You know, it's just a cascade of problems that are created from the permanence of this position. And I think if officers listening think about the manifestation of those issues, things that we feel, you know, the sharp pains in the shoulders, the numbness and tingling in the hips, you know, the sharp, right, the sharp debilitating issues that we have in the lower back as well. Those are sort of the way that these issues manifest in officers and the things that they're going to feel when we've created some of these problems through position.
And so when you talk about, you know, an average law enforcement career being 20, 22, 25 years, you know, if somebody's going to work to retirement, that's a lot of work that's been put on those areas that you're talking about, a lot of unhealthy, not good things. And so you're hurting in the first couple of years, you're hurting more beyond that. And by the time you're done, I mean, man, you're talking about, some serious back pain, some serious neck pain, some serious shoulder pain. I mean, that's no joke.
Right. And it's not just pain, Chap. You're talking about a position that's creating pain that is essentially degrading your ability to function, not only as a police officer, but as a human person, right? These are foundational patterns of movement that we need to express as people, and we're degrading those functions. So, of course, when we're at work, that's going to have an effect on our work. So I want to talk briefly just about the impact of these problems in terms of the agency, right, professionally, but also in our personal lives. So I always reference a study that the International Association of Chiefs of Police did in 2018. It was a 1-year study where they got 18 participant agencies to essentially just gather all of the data on all their officer injuries over the course of a year and report that back to them. Okay. The culmination of that study was a total of 1,295 injuries reported, 610 of which, so around half of those injuries, were what they categorized as strains, sprains, or soft tissue injuries, which a large majority of those are a lot of exactly what we've been talking about up until now. So a huge majority. The number 2 reported injury was contusion, right? So bruise. And that was 189 was number 2. And number 1, again, was
That's
610, right?
Man.
So, so it's a big portion of what's being reported. Now, if you think about the impact that has on the agency, they calculated that out to a total of 5,938 work days lost to the agency. Basing that off a 10-hour schedule, which we don't work, that's obviously 59,380 work hours lost. That's each incident each injury was an average of 4.5 days away from work for the officer.
Wow.
They extrapolate, I mean, it's crazy the data that they presented, but they extrapolated all that out to a total cost of the hours lost and a total cost of replacing those hours lost to be over $3 million to the participant agencies.
Holy cow.
So when you talk about the investment that these departments make in hiring an officer, it behooves the department to keep the officers aware, informed, and to some degree hold them accountable to keep themselves in a way that they can healthily function, just so the department can operate in the way that it needs to. But aside from that department impact, we have the impact on the individual. Because when that person leaves work and goes home and their function as a human is degraded, now their family has to suffer the consequences of the injuries and things that are happening to them at work, because they're less able to do the things that they want to do with their family because of the injuries or issues that they've developed in the workplace. And that's a big deal to me.
Wow.
And this is so important. My father was not a police officer by any means, but I remember well when his back went out and he was laid up for a while. And I'll never forget it. There was one Christmas, he literally he was on his back out in the living room. We had to bring a bed out into the living room for him to be with the rest of the family because his back just kind of went out on him, and there wasn't near the talks about mechanics and things of the green zone for lifting and all that kind of stuff that OSHA and different groups want to talk about and that kind of thing, which we laugh at sometimes, but those things are important. And that very real human toll on the family when we have an injury, it does affect the departments, but when as a parent, you're laid up with an injury that maybe could have been prevented with a little bit of maintenance and things I know you're going to get into. But when you're laid up with an injury and you're unable to interact with your kids and play with your kids the way you want to, or unable to do some of the things with your friends or just things that you would otherwise enjoy, because of an injury that's brought about because of some of these things that you are highlighting, it takes a toll on you. And that's where, again, if we think about that triangle, when we're not doing well physically, that weighs on us mentally, emotionally as well. Physically, when we're not doing well, sometimes that can bleed over into how we're doing spiritually. And so it's all connected, it's all related. And it's why I'm glad that we're focusing on this now. And again, I think most officers, again, who have been on the job for more than a year, understand that there's lower back pain is so common. I mean, I dare say, I don't know that I've talked with any officer that doesn't deal with lower back pain, that kind of thing, who's been, again, on the job for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's a given, almost. But the good news is that there is a way to help prevent some of this, or maybe at least reduce the risk a bit. How do we pivot to take us to a place where we can maybe help prevent some of these things? What are some practical things that officers can do?
Absolutely. And that's really what I'm excited to talk about. And Chap, you and I had the opportunity to speak briefly before we were recording about an analogy that I like to use is just brushing your teeth. The solutions or preventative maintenance to a lot of these complex problems that we've just been talking about can be prevented with very, very simple practices. It's just they have to be done consistently in the same way that you have to brush your teeth. Now, if you don't brush your teeth every day, think about the incredibly complex problems that you can develop that are going to require incredibly invasive dental surgeries and procedures, and really just expensive as well, that we could prevent if we were to consistently implement a very simple practice. And so with the understanding of this physiological system of the hips and the lower back, of just understanding the effect that our job has on that system and those positions that we create, all we really have to do is sort of floss our way through these ranges of motion, right? So if you think about a lunge position, and I don't have a visual reference here for this podcast, but most people are familiar with that position of a lunge. That leg that is kneeling down, what we're doing is we are opposing the range of motion of a shortened front hip. If you think about that seated position with the hips rotated forward, when we assume that lunge position, that kneeling leg is mechanically opposing a shortened front hip. We are elongating the muscles of the front hip, right? We're flossing through that range of motion in a unilateral way, so on one side, and then obviously switching sides. I'm not going to give like a prescription, right, of like, here's what you need to do every day. But what I'm going to do is just kind of touch on the understanding of what we need to be doing. And it's all going to be based around the understanding of the positional problem that we've created. So that lunge position is really, really huge. Getting into that lunge position, and then instead of a forward tilt to your pelvis, just tilting your pelvis backwards, sort of thrusting your hips forward a little bit, right? While in that lunge position, we're mechanically opposing that short front hip. We need to spend some time in that position every single day. Doesn't take long. You can, as soon as you hop out of bed, get in a lunge position, stretch out that front hip a little bit on each side. That's what I'm talking about. Doing things like lying on your back and getting into a glute bridge. I don't know if the listeners are familiar with that, but just imagine lying flat on your back, putting your feet flat on the floor, and then raising your hips and butt up off the ground. Okay. What we're doing there is we're using the muscles of, obviously the glute system and the muscles of the hamstring, like lower leg muscles there, to strengthen the movers that are responsible for that tilting and shifting of the pelvis. So again, mechanically opposing that range of motion that we've become stuck in on a regular basis, okay? So that lunge position is a huge one. Every day getting into that lunge position is good. every day, spending some time strengthening that glute system through something as simple as laying on your back, feet flat on the floor, elevating your hips. And then my favorite, and a lot of people's favorite, just a basic squat, a body weight squat, no weight or anything, but just being able to stand with your feet hip width apart and fully closing your hips as you come down into a squat position with your feet flat on the floor, accessing these ranges of motion every day. It doesn't have to take a long time, but you have to find yourself in those positions every day or you will lose them.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm reminded of this guy. I think he was 86 years old when I was talking to him about this in the fall. He works for one of the local funeral homes, 86-year-old man who was just very agile. And it was very clear that he had been taking care of himself. And I said, 86? I said, you look like you're moving really well. And he said, Chaplain, he said, you have to stay moving. You have to stay moving. He said, and he mentioned just what you said about just those body weight squats. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things he would do every day. And I think he said a couple of times a day in the morning and at night, he would do just like body weight squats down to his chair and up, 20 times. And he does that every day. And he'd also bend over and touch his toes, but he was like, how many 86-year-old men do you see? And this guy was like,
right.
He was probably 6'2", and 6'1", 6'2", and just bending over and touching his toes like it was nothing. And doing those squats in and out of the chairs. Happy to show me what he does every day, but I'm like, wow, this guy gets it. Like, he's taking care of himself. He wants to stay mobile. He wants to be able to have that full range of motion. And it clearly works. Well,
and Chap, he understands the responsibility is on him. Now, I'm not here to get on a soapbox, but I can. So feel free to grab me at any point. But I want us to think about, you say someone who has lower back pain for whatever reason, and they go into the doctor, just the way that kind of healthcare is set up right now, they're going to have to do something to manage those symptoms, right? So medication to manage the pain and the inflammation. And then if that person comes in and says, it hurts when I stand up and I walk, I have lower back pain. Okay. They're going to give you medication to manage that pain, and they're going to limit that range of motion that's causing pain. So you think about putting someone in a walker, right? Because they're experiencing pain when they're fully erect with their hips open. When I say fully erect, I mean standing fully erect. For anybody who's, this is a podcast run by chaplains, for God's sake. So, but they're going to take away that range of motion. So now they're in a walker, right, to manage that pain. They're more comfortable. But we've degraded more of their fundamental capabilities as a human. They're now walking with a walker, right? So they've done nothing to fix the systematic problem that's been occurring. So now they're in a walker. They develop more pain. They go back into the doctor. They say, well, it's hurting with you using the walker. Let's try this. Let's put you in a chair for a little while. So now let's get you in a seated position, and we'll have you get around like that for a while and see if that helps the pain. So now we've taken more of this person's fundamental ability away to function as a human. And that just progresses and progresses and progresses into the point where, who knows? If you talk about the statistics of elderly falling leading to death in the United States of America, believe it or not, it is disproportionately higher here in the United States than in third world countries where they toilet on the ground and they sleep on the ground. Now, I'm getting on my soapbox here, but what I mean by that is, imagine a world where every night when you go to bed, you have to fully close your hips and get on the ground to lay down and go to bed. And every morning when you get up, you have to do the opposite of that. You're going to preserve that function.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, brother, if you're trying to take away my toilet, we're going to have problems. All right.
Certainly don't mean that, but I just
my bed.
If you getting on your soapbox means I have to get off my throne, we're going to have issues.
No, it made me think of it with your story, Chaplain, of the 86-year-old man. There's so many other 86-year-old men in this country that have not taken that responsibility of preserving these ranges of motion, and they end up on that downward spiral that medicine unfortunately will not necessarily positioned to take you there, but it can if you're not taking it upon yourself to preserve these functions.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if you know the answer to this. I suspect you do, but we've talked about, the hours in the patrol car being in that position and even when we're not seated and the officers are not seated, they're still having that gun belt on that's cantering things a little differently. And that that's going to be a 8 to 12 hour shift. And then there's the extra long days on top of that. Right. Mm-hmm. You're not suggesting that we have to be in the opposing position for 8 hours. Right. So what kind of, just in practical terms, and there's probably not a set number, right, or time, but how much time are we talking to really make an impact in helping to prevent some of these issues?
It's a great question, and I totally understand it. And what I want listeners to take away from this is really just the awareness of the problem with the permanence of that position, and compounded with that, the awareness of what positions we need to be exploring in order to preserve the function. So I'll put it to you this way. If you haven't brushed your teeth for 10 years, is the way to fix that problem to stand over the sink for 10 years and brush your teeth? Right? It's not, but you do have to start brushing your teeth. You got to start with whatever range of motion has been taken away from us. So say, in terms of law enforcement, when we lose that ability to fully open our hips, standing up with our hips forward and our shoulders stacked over our hips. Instead, we're in that kind of hunched forward position with our hips rotated forward. We just have to start being cognizant, being aware of that position, and rotating our hips in the opposite direction and flossing through those ranges of motion. Like I mentioned, with that lunge, that deep lunge position is huge. You just got to consistently every single day spend some time in that position. Now, in terms of a police officer, when I get up in the morning, that's where I go through my stretching and mobility. It takes me 5 minutes. I find myself in positions where I feel tight, which is normally in those hip positions. I spend a few minutes there, and when I take off my uniform, I do the same thing. 5 to 10 minutes of just exploring those ranges of motion that are normally tight for me, and call it a day.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started recording, but I've had lower back issues, and for probably 12, 13 years now, but my back is better now at 51 than it was at 40. And I'm not doing, listen, I am not the most disciplined person in the world when it comes to physical health. I could always point to people who are doing a worse job than me, but that's not very helpful, right? Mm-hmm. In any regard. There's room for improvement for me. But one of the things that I have learned is just what you said. If I take that 5 minutes to do some of those things that you were talking about, just those very basic stretches or positioning myself to just kind of stretch out, elongate, that floss is the term you used. If I take just a few minutes a day, even if I'm doing it 3-4 times a week, it helps my back. It just helps me stay mobile in my back, not have the issues that I had back in my late 30s into my early 40s. And if I go a week and a half without doing some of those very basic things, it only takes a few minutes, like you said. If I miss that for a week or 10 days or so, my back will let me know. I feel, that my lower back compressing, the pressure building, the pain. If I let it go any longer than that, I'd start having that nerve pain down my leg again. And I can tell you, doing a little bit of maintenance, preventative maintenance, is way better than dealing with the full impact of neglecting your lower back and neglecting those things that can really help.
Absolutely. I agree.
So I have this question. So I firmly believe that a major part of this, the majority of this, is up to the individual. This is a choice that we all have to make on a daily basis to do the things that are necessary. Again, going back as simple as brushing your teeth to doing these stretches in the mornings and in the evenings, that kind of thing. But I'm also thinking about the numbers you shared earlier about the amount of days of work missed and the amount of hours and money and that kind of thing that you were sharing in those statistics earlier on. I'm also wondering, like, are there some proactive things that agencies can be doing with their people, and so not just, again, I fully believe that's the majority of the accountability falls on the individual. I do not disagree with that anyway, but I also wonder, like, from an agency standpoint, are there some things that agencies could be thinking about to be proactive with their people to kind of keep them from losing out on so many people for so much a long time, and then they lose out on money and and those kind of things. What are some agency things that could be thinking about?
It's a great question, and it's one that I've had a lot of conversations about. And now you got to understand, I'm certainly not a person in this agency that is in a position to make any decisions like that. But at some point, because of those statistics they're out there for anybody to find, that this has an impact on the agency. And you guys have probably met officers within this agency here that are having this, they are an example of that. So my opinion only is that the departments need to be aware of this information, and they need to, at the very least, start having a conversation about what are the things that we can be doing to prevent this stuff. And just like in the military, anytime there was a problem, the first approach to it was, all right, sit them all down, make them watch PowerPoints and learn about it, which it does that have effect, I don't know, maybe on some people. But it's a tough thing to put into practice. Certainly it's hard for me from the position I'm in to have an answer to what the agency should be doing, because there's so much that goes on in this department over my head that I don't have all the awareness of. But I think a good place to start, in my opinion, is having a physical standard in place. A physical fitness performance standard that is in place for officers, that where the department is holding you accountable, that every year you are going to have to perform to this standard. Now, I don't even really necessarily at this point care what the standard is, but for the individual officer, if they know that to remain employed, they're going to have to perform physically to some degree for this physical standard, you're putting a little bit more you're incentivizing a little bit more that personal responsibility that you referred to, of, hey, if you want to be employed here, you're going to have to pass this physical test every year. Yeah. So that's going to, I think, incentivize them to maybe, start doing the things they know they need to be doing, as opposed to just it completely being up to them. I can do it or not do it, and there's really no effect. Does that make sense?
No, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I think about the fact that most departments, and I know it doesn't require all this kind of stuff all the time, but a lot of departments have gyms that they provide for their employees. I know RPD's got a sizable gym at the station downtown. I know other departments have similar things, and then a lot of officers work out outside the departments. I know a whole lot of officers that go to gyms locally and that kind of thing. Some that I've worked out with in the past, but. I think you're right, because I think if you put that there, then they at least know that there's got to be some preemptive work on their part, right, to get to that point. Yeah. And it keeps them mobile, keeps them doing the things they should be doing. I actually had a conversation with an officer yesterday, talking to him, and he was just sharing that now that the weather has gotten nice, he said he's been trying to clear his head and also trying to kind of get back into a routine of taking care of himself. And he said, I've just started just by simply getting out and walking on the Greenway every day. He said every single day, just getting out. And he said, whether it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, he said, I don't have a time. I don't have a mileage counter. Yeah. He said, I'm just going. And then at some point I decide I turn around and go back to where I started.
And that gets me fired up just to hear that. I love to hear that kind of thing. And sort of with my background, what I've found in any aspect of training, whether that's tactics, whether that's physical training, whether that's grappling, fighting, anything, in my opinion, consistency beats intensity 100% of the time. You show me the guy that's showing up and doing something every single day. I don't care if it's 5 minutes of mobility work, but he's done that every day for 10 years, as opposed to the guy who comes in a couple times a month and gets after it. I mean, rock and rolls. He's in there just crushing it, getting his heart rate up, doing a great workout, but he does it a couple times a month.
Yeah.
I can work with that guy who's showing up every day and doing something.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now I feel personally attacked. Unfortunately, you just described my workout plan. It's like I'm gonna get after, and of course, and the problem with what you just said too, and I've lived this. The problem with that guy who shows up once a month or twice a month, you can kind of fake that in your 20s and 30s. You start getting into your 40s and 50s, and you show up once a month, and now all of a sudden you start getting injuries and stuff, and now you set yourself back more. Yeah. So all the more important to be consistent, and maybe you don't have to like really go after it all out, like. But if you just can be consistent, I find at my age, if I'm just doing something 25 to 40 minutes a day, several times a week, the impact of that is far, far greater than trying to cram in, 2 1-hour workouts or 2 hour-and-a-half workouts in a week's time. So you just bring a lot of wisdom to the table, and I'm grateful for that. And as I've been sitting here, though, one of the things I do want to make sure we're clear on, because I've had several friends who have also had back injuries, and we understand there's a difference between some of the things that occur just by virtue of wearing the belt, being seated in the car, and in those positions, the wear and tear in the body. That is something different than being involved in a car wreck or having that freak fall and you have sustain an injury to your spine. We understand that there are officers who have had injuries like that. I just don't want anyone listening to this think that we are going to be going around the departments looking at people who might have poor posture or might be questioning whether or not they're getting their stretches in the morning or something. Because we recognize people have had pretty substantial injuries that can sometimes impact mobility and those kinds of issues. And I've had some very dear friends in the department that you're serving, who are either still there or who have recently retired, who have sustained a lot, and that's a different matter entirely.
Completely, and that's a great point to bring up. There's trauma and there's pathology. Okay, and so what we're talking about is the creation of pathology just through a lack of awareness of the positions that we're creating and a lack of action on our part to do something about it. Right now, obviously, when you have catastrophic injuries and things like that, man, that's a totally different conversation, and that's something I'm not qualified to talk about in any means, of how we address that necessarily. However, that being said, when the physiological system is being maintained and it is optimized, you set yourself up for success. When trauma does occur, your recovery is much better. The palette you have to work with because of what you've been doing on a consistent basis to keep it optimized, your success moving forward when that trauma does unfortunately occur, you're going to have a lot more success.
Yeah. So I think it would be really important because of something you said a minute ago. You were really hammering on consistency, and how important that is. I don't know about you guys, but for me, as someone who struggles with that in the taking care of oneself world, I've oftentimes been told, and I've oftentimes said to other people, that the biggest hurdle in that is my mind. I know we're not talking about the mental and emotional side of the triangle today. We're focusing on the physical, but I feel like we almost cheated a little bit if we don't at least just tap into that just for a second, because to me, that's the biggest struggle against what we're talking about today. Is like, once I went to the gym, I had been going consistently to the gym 5 days a week last year at 5 o'clock in the morning. I got up at 4:30, went to the gym at 5 with a buddy of mine at another agency.
Oh, look at you.
And I lost a bunch of weight. He got hurt, and I used that as my excuse not to go back. And so I started going back last week. I decided, and it felt so good after I went. I was like, man, I was so glad I went back because I gained all the weight back. Felt terrible, and so I went back last week, and then I left. And then, like, trying to get back, I'm constantly fighting myself, up here, But I think the real success to consistency is beating the brain, beating the head.
I think you're absolutely right. And I want to be clear. When I say consistency, I don't necessarily mean the guy who's going to the gym for an hour every day consistently.
Right.
I mean the person who has a daily practice.
Yes.
The habit is not lost. Okay. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I keep a 20-pound kettlebell next to my couch. It's tucked away. It's out of the way. So inevitably when I'm sitting around and I'm taking care of my 3-year-old at the house, I can pick that thing up and I can watch Spider-Man with him while I do a little grip work. It takes, there's no reason why I can't do that. Right. I don't have to get up and go to the gym for an hour. Right. That would be optimal. Okay.
Right.
But by just the conscious effort of taking advantage of the opportunity to do something, maybe when I'm watching Spider-Man with my 3-year-old, instead of sitting on the couch, I assume a lunge position and I stretch out a little bit for 5 minutes while I'm watching TV. Just getting your brain accustomed to that pattern of, I need to be getting into certain positions. Maybe I need to be, when I have the opportunity to drop down and do a set of push-ups or squats or whatever, I'm taking that opportunity. So that's what I mean by the guy who's consistent over the guy who's intense, the person who has that practice that is ingrained. It is habitual, whether they go to a gym or not, they have a practice of doing something every day, no matter what.
Yeah.
If we can complete our way around the triangle just a little bit, and again, for me as a chaplain, for me as a Christian minister, as a Christian man, I believe that I was created in the image of God, that my body is a temple. And if that's what I believe to be true, according to the holy book that I subscribe to in the Holy Bible, then I need to take care of myself physically, like that. And the way I look at that spiritually is if the better physical condition I'm in, the longer I'm available to serve my God and to serve others in His name. And so it is all related. And for me, and I think you're right. It is up. It's in our minds. It's in our head. So much when it comes to training and discipline, it's in our head. But for me, it always gets boiled back down to that. And am I honoring God with my body? And in that area, I do struggle. I definitely struggle in that area more than I do spiritually or otherwise. But when I take the time to think about it, I'm like, wow, am I really honoring God with my body? And if not, then who am I? I'm just cutting short my opportunity to be a benefit to someone else. And not that I'm the gift to the world. Okay. I recognize that. I have reminders of that most every day, but it's an honor and it's a privilege for me to serve other people. It's an honor and a privilege for me to serve in the departments that SHIELD is able to serve in. And if I'm not doing those basic things to take care of myself physically, then I'm robbing myself of that opportunity to be at my best in serving others. And so I want to make my life count. And so, if doing a little bit of what you've talked about today helps me stay mobile, helps me to prevent injuries, if it keeps me in a position where I can hop up and get out and get to the hospital when I need to, or at a moment's notice, hop out of bed and go to a call, or whatever the case may be, then it just makes sense. It just makes good practical sense to do some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. When you get that triangle that y'all talk about, I mean, throughout this whole conversation, I think you guys have done a great job of keeping the understanding of how all of this is so connected. And it's not just the one thing. So if there's one part of that triangle that you're really leaning into and you're really focusing on, also being cognizant of how it's connected to all the other things that we need to pay attention to as well.
Well, and I think one thing for leaders, right, and then for all three of us at this table and the positions that we hold, and for anyone in the law enforcement sector, especially where everyone is considered a leader, especially by society, it's hard to talk about these things with people if you aren't doing well at those things yourself. It's hard. You're always told lead by example. Mm-hmm. And if you're not doing well, and I know I struggle with the mind game of the physical part of it. I feel like I do okay on the other side, other pieces, but I don't. It's hard for me to have that conversation if I'm not doing so well on that myself, and that's kind of where I got to last week. It's kind of like, okay, I got to get back into a groove.
Practice what you preach.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, Adam, I didn't want to say anything, but you brought it up. That's why I asked Greg to be here.
Amen.
Today. So,
Amen. I couldn't agree more
we're doing
with you
this
on
for you.
Yes.
This is kind of our form of an intervention.
Oh man, you guys are the best. At least I am not bitter about this at all. I just want to tell you, so not one bit.
Well, what I'm excited about is getting home and talking to my wife about some of these things that I should be doing on a daily basis to free up my lower back, and so I'll leave that there because Gareth might be listening to this later, and he gets very embarrassed when I start talking about things like that. So.
Yeah, he does. So
poor guy.
Well, Greg, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Of course.
It was so excited when I came in and Darren said, hey, what do you think about this? I was like, man, this is awesome. This is a great idea. So I think this is really cool because, like I said, this gives us a chance again, and I'm not trying to be a broken record, but again, what you just said, like, it gives us a chance to address all the sides of that triangle, and it's so important because, again, if we're going to be truly wholly well, we got to deal with all of those things. Yeah. And so today's been a fun conversation. So thanks so much.
Thank you guys. I'm grateful for the opportunity to get on here and talk with you guys. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Just, again, the only thing is it's kind of tough. A lot of the things I talked about without a visual aid, sort of hard to express what I mean. So what I'm saying is any officers listening to this who know who I am, you know where to find me if you have any questions or need some demonstrations, man. I'm always available. So.
Yeah, and if we do have an officer listen that's not part of his local organization, you can contact us and we can put you in contact with him. And we know how to get in touch with him, and you can reach out to us, you can call us, you can email us, you can reach out through our social media. However, there are lots of ways that you can get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to get you plugged in with the right person, with him or whoever it might be. But it's been a really good day. Been a fun conversation to have. So thank you guys so much for listening. We will catch you back on the next episode.